Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. So today we're going to take on a very simple but important question that I'm getting a lot from people. Has narcissism always been a thing? Drop your answers in the comments, but what do you think? Has narcissism always been a thing? Okay, so you put your answers in there. The answer to that is a resounding yes. I know everyone likes to think that, okay, we all lived in a really nice world, and then there was MySpace and Facebook, and then all the rest of it, and then there was narcissism. No, that's not how it works. Enough of us have had narcissistic parents or grandparents that were way pre-social media to know that even in our own families, it has gone back multiple generations. Listen, most families run out of people in the family who are old enough, who can, in terms of sort of how far back they can recall, maybe great-grandparents. So we often don't have a history of what it was like way back when, maybe anything more than maybe 100 years in a family's history. But we kind of do have a history. Read a history book. People throughout history have been pretty damn awful to each other. When you look at what has happened in history, as terrible as some working conditions are now, there have actually been some significant reforms in the past 100 years to make workplaces a little bit safer. Up until then, the guys in charge didn't care if people were getting hurt or dying on the job regularly, and there was absolutely no regulation of that. Zero empathy in those situations. Take a look at how we've treated people who are ill, how world leaders have behaved, how much dehumanization is a part of human history. All of that is a manifestation of narcissism. As long as we have recorded history, we have nothing but lessons on narcissism. It has always been a thing, but historically narcissism wasn't written about in any meaningful way until the late 1800s. And then we started seeing like, oh, maybe this isn't such a good thing. But I often get the question, is this a new thing? And obviously, definitely not. In fact, our history books are largely a rogues gallery of narcissistic folks. Dig deep. Most, if not all, American presidents, invaders, explorers, prime ministers, premiers, dictators, all narcissistic. We may be a little nicer now, but the tools of social control, for example, a woman historically could never safely leave a marriage, or a person just didn't have the options the way they do now. So talking about it, even if there was a vocabulary for what narcissism is, oh, it was kind of pointless. I mean, and we humans are primates after all, right? And primates do have an alpha male structure. So maybe everyone sort of grudgingly accepted the narcissists, saw them as the alphas they were, gave them the bigger portion of dinner, and likely just tried to avoid them the best that they could. What's new, though? Not narcissism. Narcissism is tale as old as time. But what is new is that maybe in the last 20 years is a more formal recognition of how bad narcissism is for the rest of us, and a real focus on the harm of it. That's what has changed. I do agree. Social media made it so the history books weren't just about the famous narcissists, but now anybody who liked the sound of their voice enough and wanted validation could get it quite easily and quite quickly. So it seems more ubiquitous because social media is everywhere. We just created more systems. Obviously, social media, reality TV, all of these different ways for narcissistic people to get validation and be seen the way that have never existed before. There isn't more narcissism. We just have more ways of seeing it more often. But the harm of people being invalidating and cold and callous and entitled and unempathic and just plain mean, that's what's changed. And the field of mental health is still bringing up the rear on this. Still the field is trying to believe everyone can change. Meh, not so sure about that. You are not going to turn me into an extrovert, and you aren't going to turn a narcissistic person into an angel. The difference is, for other people who cannot change their personalities, they're not likely harming other people through their conduct. So that introverted person who's just happy on their own, they're not hurting people. Their personality change isn't going to really benefit anyone. So yes, it has always been a thing. We have a name for it now. Narcissism's always been a problem. Think about that king who beheaded all those wives. That was toxic. Again, I'm going to say it again, open a history book. You cannot turn a page without running into a narcissist. First, narcissism got named, and then in the last few decades, we started recognizing the harm. When I stopped to think about how many people who have suffered through the years because of these relationships, it's pretty bad. Narcissism is at the core of every human rights violation, every war, every bad thing that has happened. But since we can't really do much about that, I guess the only thing we could do is launch massive campaigns to support parents and foster discussions about vulnerability and emotionality. Well, let's face it, those things are never going to happen. So we're not going to stop this tide of narcissism. Instead, let's put our focus on the people who are suffering. Don't try to stop the rain. You just got to build better umbrellas. It sucks, but it is what it is. Maybe we will never fully evolve out of our inner primate selves, and the alphas will keep ruining it for everyone. And yet the rest of the primate troop will fall into line, as we always have. Our evolutionary histories may very be at the core of that toxic person who continues to gaslight you. And just because it feels so determined that this is how it's always going to be, doesn't mean that we have to keep sacrificing ourselves on the altar of toxic behavior. Just know that this isn't something new. This is not an invention of Facebook or Twitter. Those things just made it a lot worse and made it more visible, but it's always been there. Thanks again.